Hello, everyone. Welcome to an all new episode of the Indic Explorer Show. I'm your host, Vineet. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, for youngsters who watch the show uh, and those who are in the precipice of starting out their career right from, their college getting over and going to the workplace, a very key pillar of the skills that they need to have, which is not taught in institutions, but they need to learn and have that skill, is what you call the soft skill. The ability to speak and also to engage in an organization in a professional manner so that they are able to take their career forward in that sense. And it's a soft skill, it's not something that is taught in our educational curriculum, right? So, to kind of unpack speaking in a corporate setting, public speaking, especially for those of us who have a fear for it, as well as to understand the various paradigms of organizational behavior, I have a very special guest with me today. Please join me in welcoming Matt Abrahams. Namaste. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you so much. I would love. I'm very excited to be here with you.
So, Matt is a professor in Stanford School of Business, and he's an expert in organizational behavior. And he's just done a book on think faster and talk smarter. So, it'll be good, Matt, if you would just introduce yourself briefly for those of us who don't know you, and also talk about why did you actually go about writing this book?
Sure. So I am somebody who is passionate about communication. Communication is critical to our success in our personal and professional lives, as you alluded to. And I have been studying, teaching, and coaching communication skills for many, many years, decades, in fact. And I've been teaching strategic communication at Stanford's Graduate School of Business for over 13 years now. And I learned very early in my career that planned presentations, pitches, meetings with agendas are very important, and we need to work to do those well. But what's even more important is what I call spontaneous speaking, speaking in the moment, answering questions, giving feedback, making small talk, introducing yourself. All of those are critical skills, and very few of us ever think about those as skills to develop, and we rarely get any education or training on them. So that's what really motivated the new book. That's what motivated a lot of the work I'm currently doing. And a lot of that is reflected in the podcast I host, Think Fast, Talk Smart, where we talk just about communication. So I really center my life around communication and try to help others get better at their communication.
So tell me something. Do you think speaking comes as, like, many people have this conception that speaking is a natural talent and it can't be honed? Which side of the wall do you fall in as far as this question is concerned,
Well, I'm sure this isn't going to
and why?
surprise. I'm sure this isn't going to surprise you, but I firmly believe this is a skill that can be developed and should be developed. Uh, there are people who are born more comfortable speaking. There are those who have done it a lot, so they are less anxious and concerned about it. But the reality is, we can all get better, and in fact, should get better. And even those that are good at communicating need to work to hone and develop their skills. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in the thousands of students that I've taught and the hundreds of people that I've coached. We can all get better at communicating.
So, how does one overcome the fear, the phobia of talking in public? Because I know a lot of corporate professionals who, in their personal lives, are brilliant communicators. If they are actually having a casual talk, they would actually hold a conversation very well. Of course, there are two sets of people: one, the extrovert who has fear of crowds, maybe, and then the other one is introverts who generally have problem in communicating. So how do you go about diagnosing this problem and solving it for either of the two types?
Well, so I think anxiety looms large regardless of if you're extroverted or introverted, experienced or unexperienced. And we have evidence to support that. There's some research that suggests upwards of 85% of people feel anxious in high stakes situations. And there are things we can do to manage that anxiety. And I'm happy to get to those in just a moment. But I want to make a distinction between extroversion and introversion. And the assumption is often that introverts aren't good at communicating and extroverts are better at communicating. And that's actually not true. The difference has to do with the energy involved and the speed with which people feel comfortable communicating. Extroverts tend to derive energy from communicating and being social and connecting with others, and they tend to do it very quickly. Introverts actually take energy to communicate, and they feel more tired after those social interactions, and it can take them a while or a little bit longer, at least compared to extroverts, to actually formulate their thoughts and communicate them. But the reality is you can be a very effective introverted communicator, and you can be a really lousy extroverted communicator. It really has to do with the energy involved. And in fact, we tend to think of the extroverted, gregarious, talkative extrovert who's really successful, but there's a whole bunch of research that says thoughtful, interpersonally sensitive, connected communication, which all tend to be hallmarks of introverts, actually are the more successful strategy. So introvert and extrovert, I don't think necessarily are the right way to characterize the ability to communicate and not. They're just different ways of approaching it in different energy levels. But when it comes to anxiety, regardless of extroverted or introverted, there are things you can do. We have to manage symptoms, what we physiologically experience, like sweatiness, shakiness, rapid heart rate. And then we also have to manage the sources, the things that initiate and exacerbate anxiety. So there are things we can do and should do to feel more comfortable and confident when we communicate.
So let's say I'm kind of trying to go into the micro of it. So let's say that there is a presentation. How does, like, there could be different aspects to it. One could be just talking to a large group in a seminar versus a closed group in a presentation. What distinctions are there in these settings, and how differently or similarly are these to be handled?
So clearly, situation matters a lot when we communicate. The context matters. If you're on a panel, that's different than giving a presentation. It's different than if you're running a meeting or contributing to a meeting. So we have to think about the context in which we speak. Sometimes it's virtual, sometimes it's in person, sometimes synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid. So those circumstances matter. Whenever you communicate, there are some foundational things you must consider. First, who is the audience? Depending on the audience, their knowledge level, their attitudes, their areas of resistance, you need to adjust and adapt your communication. Similarly, the context, and context can be the environment that you're in, virtual or in person, many people, few people, but also timing. What time of day? You and I are in very different time zones right now, and it's very different. You're starting your day, you might be full of energy. I'm ending my day, I might be quite tired. That matters. How many meetings have we had prior to this communication? So there are lots of contextual factors we have to take into account. There's no one rule that says, if you're presenting and it's hybrid, then you should do this. You simply have to think about these characteristics and then make your best judgment. But we absolutely have to think about these to impact our communication. The reality is this: most of us are so busy and so rushed, we don't take time to think much about our communication. We just beg, borrow, and steal every slide we've ever created before, slam it together and deliver it, and hope that it's helpful. And that clearly is not the most effective way to communicate. So we must take the time to think about our audience, our context, the timing, and what's the best manner to communicate effectively.
You spoke about meetings. So, what should a good meeting look and sound like? How should it start? How typically, like a small closed team meeting of 3 to 4 people or 5 people at max with a manager and the reportees, right? What is the anatomy of a good meeting? What's the best practices?
Great question. There are many, and I could go on for a long time. The reality is, most people are not good at running meetings or participating in meetings. So let me give you just some best practices looking at before, during, and after. So before the meeting, you should spend some time thinking about who are the right people to attend, what's the right time of day and sequence of the meeting, crafting an agenda of the critical topics. Which topic do you put in which order? And that really depends on, does the team already know each other and can work well so you can jump into a more meaty, difficult topic? Or is this a new team coming together and maybe we have to start a little easier to ease them in? You need to think about how you set expectations in advance of the meeting. The most underutilized tool, I believe, for helping meetings run better is the calendar invite. We just slap out an invite, put the name of the meeting and the URL and send it off. You can do so much more. What do you call the meeting? Your meeting's name can set expectations for what's going on. Let me give you some best practices. Don't put the word meeting or any synonym for meeting in the title. Because when you say update meeting, that doesn't sound exciting or invigorating, but you might say product launch or product viability. All of a sudden, that sounds more engaging or curiosity filled. Have the agenda in the meeting invite. Give a task. Maybe it's a question you want people to come ready to ask. Maybe it's some kind of challenge, and then start your meeting with that challenge. If you're going to use some kind of technology, let's say we're going to use a breakout room, make sure you say in the invite that that's what's going to happen, and then put a link to a tutorial for whatever that tool is. Even if everybody knows how to use a breakout room, but when they see you put it there, it prepares them. And because you put a link to a tutorial, it shows you care. So you've already bolstered your credibility and you haven't even started the meeting. So those are some things we can do in advance of the meeting. When the meeting starts, jump right in with an activity. The big mistake people make is they review the previous meeting as the first step in their meeting. Most people don't like meetings. So let me get this right. We're going to start this meeting by reminding you of the meeting you didn't like. That's silly. Start with a task, get people engaged, and then review the previous meeting. Make sure you're inviting others to participate. Equity in meeting participation is critical, especially when people are hybrid, because the people who are remote tend to be ignored. So you need to pull them in. So how you facilitate the meeting, how you enforce whatever ground rules you have really matters. And then when the meeting's over or ending, make sure you document the action items, clearly place the notes or the minutes from the meeting so people understand, and prepare people for the next meeting. So there's a lot we can do to be more effective when we run meetings. When we're in meetings, we need to make sure that our contribution is meaningful and connected. And I hope at some point we get the opportunity to discuss structure, because structuring your contributions rather than just listing can really help you be more effective. So I can go on forever about meetings. We are not effective in meetings. In fact, on my podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart, we've just released 2 back-to-back episodes talking to meeting experts to help us get better at running meetings.
Interesting. Now, in the modern workplace, I think two skills are, two things are really, really crucial to succeed. One is networking, how well you network within your organization with the key stakeholders, your boss, your skip level manager, as well as the second thing, and the more important one, how do you find a mentor? So, how do you build networks within your
Well,
organization or
finding
outside in the industry and mentor?
Well, so I think mentoring is really critical, and I've benefited from mentors throughout my career. Uh, you have to first figure out what it is you need mentoring on. Where are the skills that you would like to develop or hone or get feedback on? And then identify through observation people who are good at those skills, people who have the skills that you're looking for, and find ways to connect with those people and ask, and make sure you're very clear in what you're asking for. If you just say, will you be my mentor? Somebody might be really intimidated by that. But if you say, I've really noticed how you facilitate interactions in meetings, and I really appreciate that. Would you be willing to spend some time with me helping me to hone that skill? That's a very different ask. So use some tools to search people out. LinkedIn is a great tool, for example. Go to people in your network, ask others who, if they have mentors and who those mentors are, define clearly what it is you're looking for, and then think about how you can ask for the very specifics of what it is you're hoping to gain from those circumstances.
And on building networks, especially within the organization.
Yeah, so building networks is critical, and you have to be very conscious of it. And networks can be very loose or very tight, and you have to think about both networks. So finding individuals who can support your point of view, finding individuals who demonstrate the skills you want, observing who others connect with, very important. I think the best thing to do in building any relationship at work, especially trying to build networks, is observe and watch. Aligning yourself through supporting and amplifying people's messages, and after meetings or interactions, going up and thanking them, sending emails to them so they see that you care and that you're willing to contribute. We're much more likely to align with somebody who exerts effort than somebody who just says, hey, I'd love to align with you. So it's really important that you identify what it is you're looking for, and be very cognizant of how to connect with those people. It has to be very strategic.
Right. Uh, and many working professionals face this challenge of quote unquote visibility issues, right? How does one showcase your work so that it is noticed while at the same time not overdoing it to the point of becoming self promotion? How does one navigate that?
Well, I think the biggest thing to think about is showing versus telling. Telling is itemizing. I won this award, or I had this, achieved this quota or status. Telling can be seen as awkward, braggadocious, overconfident, arrogant, but showing can be better. So telling can be arrogant, whereas showing can actually be really helpful. And you show through story. So it might be that I say, in the last deal that we closed, we did this, this, and this, and it helped us bring that deal to closure. So I'm telling you the story rather than just itemizing the results. So all of us should get better at telling stories that demonstrate our success. And a story doesn't have to be long winded, it can be very straightforward, a short little anecdote, but taking the time to really detail and explain what it is that you've done can really make a difference.
Right. In terms of team building activity, let's say a team is just getting formed, how does one create a cohesive, feeling within a team, in the sense that how does one kind of form a team if you're a new manager?
Well, certainly there are going to be restrictions and advice and guidance as to what makes the most sense for your teams that you're forming. But the the critical element is to understand the goal of your team, understand what it is you're trying to accomplish, to do a gap analysis to understand where are the skills that we have and what are the skills we need, and then seek out individuals that have those skills. Make sure you set expectations for engagement and involvement in the team before you invite, formally get people involved. You talk to them, say, hey, this is the project. Clearly, there are some people based on their experience and roles need to be on the team. But it's all about expectation setting. And once you form the team or identify the team, you should do things to connect people to each other, perhaps doing icebreakers where people share information or do common activities. But you want to set people up for success. And part of that is building a sense of psychological safety. So helping people understand the ground rules, understanding that equity of contribution is expected, and making sure that people have the tools and opportunities to participate as they see fit. And if you do all of that, then you will increase the likelihood of being successful when you are building teams and executing with teams.
You mentioned a very interesting point earlier in this podcast about small talk. And it's
Mhm.
an oft repeated thing. And it's a very, while small talk is actually small, it's actually quite a challenging and a difficult thing. I notice it's actually easier to talk macro and big, right? But it is harder to talk small. So, could you tell a little bit more on the value of small talk and how to do a good small talk beyond just asking how is the weather today?
That's one of the biggest problems people have. So yes, I think small talk gets a bad rap. Big things can happen during small talk. There's a lot that we can get accomplished during small talk. So we need to be thinking about, first and foremost, the barriers to effective small talk. Many of us feel like, I don't know what to say. I had a guest on my podcast. Her name is Rachel Greenwald. She's fascinating. She's an academic and a matchmaker. She helps people form romantic relationships. And she said this very important thing. When making small talk, your goal is to be interested, not interesting. In other words, your goal is to be curious, to help invite others to communicate. So it's about question asking. It's about bringing common experience together so people can actually interact rather than trying like a tennis star to serve an ace over the net and score. Because when you score, you might win, but the other person loses. We want to have a game where it's equal, where I'm setting you up for success and you set me up for success. So rather than saying, hi, how are you? And you say, fine, how are you? That's a doom loop. Nothing is accomplished. Maybe what I do is say, wasn't that keynote fascinating? I found this one point really interesting. What did you find interesting? Now, all of a sudden, I've set us up for a dialogue. So it's about curiosity, being interested, not interesting. And that can make a huge, huge difference in effective communication.
I think what I find as a very interesting takeaway of many things that you've said is it's kind of important to be a good listener to be a good communicator,
Mm.
which is so counterintuitive, right? Like,
I think you're exactly right, and very astute that you picked up on that. The ability to listen is critical to successful communication. We need to learn to communicate better by listening and directing our attention and our comments to the needs of our audience. And the only way you do that is through empathy and listening. You know, we all suffer from the curse of knowledge and the curse of passion. We know too much about what we're talking about. And we often care too much about it. And we make mistakes and we don't target the right level of information or the right amount of detail. The only way you can do that is by actually being empathetic and listening to what's needed in the moment. So we all have to become better at listening. And if you do, it becomes a superpower. It can really help you connect to what your audience is looking for and can help you hone the communication that you need in that moment.
For mid-career professionals, especially those who are transitioning from an individual contributor role to team leaders and project managers, that transition is a very, very difficult and not a very easy one for a lot of people. I've noticed a lot of people who are good at doing the work themselves, but when it comes to handling a team, their competence can really drastically vary. So, how does one transition from that individual contributor to a leader of a small team?
So that's that can be a very challenging transition. Often people are put into a managerial role or a team lead role because they're good at the task, not because they're necessarily good at managing people. The ability to manage others is a skill unto itself. Even if you're an expert at the task you are managing people to do, it doesn't mean you're a good manager. So we have to really focus on the managerial skills involved: listening, goal setting, prioritization. And those are skills that we need to develop through mentorship, through classes, through having support from others. And if you're put into that position, you really need to do a gap analysis, figure out where you have the skills, where you don't, and then seek out avenues to develop those skills. It is often the case that managers are not set up for success, and we have to take the time to really set them up so that they can do well in their new roles.
And as a manager, if there is a conflict in the team, how does one handle that between two stakeholders? Uh, how does one go about addressing that conflict?
Well, so conflict is a whole topic unto itself. And I have a lot to say. First, it has to do with framing. So I see conflict as really a problem to be solved. So your job in managing conflict is inviting everybody involved to help coordinate and collaborate to solve the problem. So clearly, if there's a conflict that's going on that involves something that's inappropriate or dangerous in some way, you just have to stop it. As the leader, you just put it, this can no longer happen. But if it's a conflict over differences of opinion or approaches, you need to facilitate that interaction. So first, you have to approach it as a problem to be solved, and your goal is to get people to collaborate, which means you want to avoid making people defensive. You need to invite people to come together and share. And we have to get people to listen. It is possible to disagree, but still understand different perspectives, and you have to tease that out. Similarly, you need to separate the people from the problem. A lot of conflict gets personal, and I'm upset with you. What the real issue is I need to focus on your opinion or your view of the world and my view of the world, so I can separate the people from the problem. So a lot of it has to do with creative problem solving, bringing people together, getting them to listen, and making sure that you broker an arrangement or agreement that at least people have input into. It doesn't mean everybody agrees. That's not always the possible, but at least people feel like they contributed and their voices were heard.
And do you have singular conversations, or do you have those conversations with the said parties in question together? Which works better?
It really depends. I'm a big fan of meeting with individuals first and then bringing them together, just to make sure I, as the person trying to broker the conflict management, understands people's perspective. I think it gives me credibility when I say, in talking to all of you, I see the problem this way. But there are times where that's not possible. And if that's the case, then when you bring people together, you have to make sure that everybody has a voice and an opportunity to share. Personally, I like to start at the individual level.
Now, there's a saying that colleagues are not friends, and there is a distinction, although, of course, those boundaries can intersect many times. So, and even a casual setting like an office party is also a place where people do observe behavior. Behavior is not just seen at the workplace, right? If there are colleagues, then that's how it is. So, how should one navigate this very gray boundary between colleague and friends? Do's or don'ts.
Yeah, so that's really hard for me to answer because everybody is different, and to say you should never become friends or compatriots with those you work with, I think is not a great idea because if you think about it, we spend more time at work than probably anywhere else in our lives, right? And so the people we work with, we want to be close to. Clearly, there are certain boundaries that should not be crossed, and you have to negotiate those boundaries, but I'm not a big fan of always and never. So never make friends at work. I don't think that's appropriate. I do think you have to be cautious and think about those boundaries and make sure you define them clearly. It can be more challenging when there are power and status differences. I learned a long time ago when I first became a manager, it was more important to be respected than liked. And actually, being respected led to liking. But when I first started as a manager, my goal was to be liked by everybody, and I was taken advantage of. Right? People didn't do what they were told to do or asked to do. People would defer to me and make me do more work. So there can be tricky relationships here, but I don't think it's never formed friendships at work. Some of my closest friends are people I used to work with.
Right. And how does one handle office politics? How do you handle that kind of, and it's the reality of life, right? There is no workplace without office politics. So how does one actually go about handling it and still remain professional and kind of uh yes.
Well, so thank you for that question, as if I know the answer. So one, you have to be sensitive to it, and I think we have to call it out. And if something's going on that you think is challenging or unfair, but we just have to. When human beings get together, quote unquote politics tend to follow, and politics tend to be based on historical experiences, power differences, status differences, cultural differences. And by culture, I don't just mean place of origin, country of origin. It could be one department versus a different department, have different cultures and ways of doing things. So being aware of them, observing them, I believe shining a light on them can be really helpful to trying to minimize the impact that office politics has on what's going on.
You mentioned a very interesting point. As a manager, it's important to be respected than liked. I wanted you to dwell a little deeper on that, especially because sometimes there can be managers who you would call democratic, and that can lead to the authority not kind of the writ not running large sometimes when it is required, right? How does a manager keep that balance between, like, being a first among equals, if that's the aura that one wants to project? It's a very fine balance.
It is. It is. And I think first and foremost, we just have to be aware of it, and we need to focus on it, right? Many of us just try to get our job done, or we're so busy, we just want people not to get upset with us. We absolutely need to make sure that we are conscious of maintaining the role that we have and helping others to be supported, but without going overboard. So this is tricky. There's no one answer to that question except to be sensitive to it and to adjust and adapt. Now, you can certainly ask for help. You can certainly observe what others are doing and try to replicate it. But we definitely need to be thinking about it often in what we do.
This is a common problem for working professionals. How does one handle a toxic manager?
Well, so again, a very challenging situation. I always believe that when you have a challenging situation, that you first approach and try to connect with the person that you have, and you can give feedback by saying, this behavior led to this feeling that I had, or led to this result, to help make the person aware. Sometimes people dubbed toxic aren't necessarily aware of the impact of their behavior. So sometimes it's just shedding light on that, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know." Another way to give that information is to reward positive behavior. So let's say there's somebody who is a manager who always interrupts. Well, maybe what you do is at the end of a meeting, you say, "Hey, it was I really liked hearing Ashley's contribution. Thanks so much for giving her the space to contribute." So by doing that, I'm rewarding the positive without saying, and Fred and Joe and Varesh, you interrupted, right? So there are different ways to signal that. Now, if that doesn't get you anywhere, then I think trying to form coalitions and allies and talking to HR to get some support is a good thing. You don't have to walk down this road by yourself. But highlighting and making people aware, in my experience, many toxic managers are just clueless. They just don't know. And by helping them come to understand, they want to change their behavior. Now, there are some people that just by power or virtue of their personalities don't care, and they are toxic for other reasons. And that's when you have to invoke others and policies and procedures.
You've also spoken about AI, so I wanted to know your take on how AI is going to affect the workplace, work culture going forward. How can one incorporate AI in a positive way?
Yeah, so I am optimistic that AI is going to be very helpful and something that we should engage with and be hopeful for. On my podcast, when AI first came out, ChatGPT first came out, we wanted to do an episode on it, and we decided, what we're going to do is we're just going to interview AI. We're just going to ask AI what it thinks. And that's exactly what we did. So we interviewed it, typed information in, and then this is before it had voice to itself. And we ran the text through a voice synthesizer and got information out from it. And it was really useful. It was really insightful. And the biggest thing that we learned, or I learned by interviewing AI, generative AI, and in talking to others about this, is the big difference between humans and AI is the ability to connect. The power of communication is in connection. And generative AI, I don't believe, will ever be able to connect in the same way that human beings can. Yet it can help and bolster many things we do. It can iterate faster. It can create different versions and translations of things. So we should harness it for what it's good at, which is coming up with lots of variations, synthesizing information quickly, pulling information from lots of places. But we shouldn't expect to use it to replace things like human connection. So I personally use it to help me in my teaching, to provide opportunities for my students to gain examples, for my non-native speaking students to get help. There's lots of value that I think it can bring that will really help in our day-to-day communication. That said, I think the jury's still out, and I think there's a lot that we still have to wait and see in terms of veracity, in terms of the accuracy of the information. So there's still work to be done for sure.
Okay. And finally, what do you think is the future of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace?
You ask these very broad questions. My goodness. So I believe the world is a better place when we hear from diverse points of view and people's opinions are at least considered and respected. So I believe diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are critical to help us, especially as issues and ideas become more complex in our world. So I support well thought out and well executed DE&I initiatives. Now, on my podcast, I've interviewed some experts in DE&I, and they would argue that we don't always execute these programs well. But I do believe that we need to find ways and avenues to help people share what's on their mind and to give people equal opportunity to share their opinions. And so that's critical. As a communication person, I'm always thinking about how can we adjust our communication channels, our timing, the language we use to make sure that everybody feels comfortable that they have an opportunity to contribute. So it's important. I think it will only become more important. I mean, right now, how many generations do we have in the workforce? At least 4 different generations. Each generation has a different expectation for communication, for how and what and who should be speaking. We have more and more multicultural organizations. So yeah, DE&I, really important. But again, as are all the issues you've brought up, very complex and lots of opportunities to get better at how we do it.
Great. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Very complex issues that a lot of young working professionals would want to know about, and I think a lot of that. Two big takeaways for me has been that you need to be a great listener to be a good communicator,
Mhm.
and the other thing is about walking the tightrope. There's no black and white solution to a lot of problems. It requires a lot of balancing act to navigate complex situations at the workplace. I'm very thankful, Matt, for you giving us time for this show and giving your thoughts on these subjects. If you would like to share anything about your handle, your social media, your podcast, please feel free to do so.
Thank you, and I've enjoyed the conversation. And while your questions were challenging because these are big issues you brought up, I really appreciate you teeing them up and thinking about them. So the best way to get in touch with me or to learn more about what I do is to go to mattabrahams.com. If you use LinkedIn, I'm a big user of LinkedIn, would love to connect with you there. And I invite everybody to listen into the podcast I host, Think Fast, Talk Smart.
Okay, guys, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, signing off.